People always use my driveway to turn around. A few days ago, someone pulled in and didn't leave. It happens all the time, and I can't help but find it irritating. I live on the outskirts of town, less than a mile from a busy highway, and people pull into my driveway at all hours of the day. It always makes me nervous, wondering if someone is dropping by unannounced, only to see them sit at the end for a moment, before reversing out and driving away. It's most unsettling at night, seeing the headlights cut through the trees in my front yard while they sit there. It makes me wonder if someone's scoping my house out like they're thinking of robbing me. I park my car in the garage, so it always looks like I'm not home. In the end, they always drive away, and I'm left feeling foolish at someone's lack of direction. A few days ago, however, I stood and watched them from the window of my living room, peeking out through the blinds. The car sat there suspiciously, idling just at the end of the driveway. I thought maybe they were lost and checking the GPS on their phone, trying to figure out where they missed a turn. I try not to be a total jerk about it and give them time to figure out where they're going before jumping to conclusions. But it was after 11 o'clock at night, and not only were they interrupting my movie, they were weirding me out. When the car stayed there for 5 minutes, I started to get worried. I raised the blinds and started waving to see if I could get some kind of reaction. The car continued to idle there, the faint trail of exhaust rising in the chilly night. Nobody turned on the dome light, nobody got out. Nothing. I just stood there watching, wondering if I should go out there or call the police. Dialing 911 seemed a little ridiculous without even going out and seeing first. So I did something I really didn't want to. I went to see why they were sitting there. I put on my shoes and pulled on a jacket. I brought my phone for light or in case I needed to help them call a tow truck or something. I thought the best case scenario was maybe they got a flat tire and their phone had died and they were too nervous to knock on the door. Like I said, it was after 11, and knocking on someone's door at that hour could be just as shady as watching them sit at the end of my driveway. Against my better judgment, I stepped outside. I could hear the engine running in the distance, along with a chorus of chorus chirping in the night. It took me a few seconds to get the courage to walk out there. The driveway is pretty long and it's really dark. Everything feels scarier in the middle of the night, especially with no neighbors close by. I swallowed hard and started walking, keeping my eyes on the car as I walked over. I turned on the flashlight function on my phone and tried to keep a steady pace on the way. Gravel crunched under my feet, and my palms started to sweat. Maybe they were drunk and fell asleep. Maybe it was a couple of young kids lost on a late night out. And when I got they were just looking at me. Hello? I asked aloud, trying not to sound as nervous as I was. And no response. I took a couple steps closer, trying to see if there was anyone else in there with them. The urge to call the police itched at me more the closer I got. You lost? This is private property, I called out again, the features in the driver's face looking more unsettling the closer I got. I could only see their eyes, their nose. Why couldn't I see anything else? Why weren't they moving? The headlights were blinding, making it hard to see. I kept pushing forward, holding up a hand to try and block so I could see. I had no choice but to get closer and try to get around to the driver's side to get a better look. Or more crunching footsteps and their car getting louder. The driver didn't move a muscle, didn't motion to me or anything. I realized I was holding my breath, the anxiety welling within me as I approached. The driver looked like a woman, her hands in front of her, holding the wheel. But it was so dark in there, I couldn't see her hands, only the unmoving stare. I walked around the front of the vehicle to the driver's side and held up my flashlight to see them. They didn't turn to look at me. They didn't do anything. My eyes slowly calibrated what was in front of me, and when it finally pieced together, I wanted to scream. The woman was dead, her lifeless eyes frozen on my house, unable to look away. Her throat had been slashed, and the entire car was spattered with blood. Duct tape was everywhere. A single wrap across her forehead to hold her in place, a strip over her mouth so she couldn't speak, and several tight binds around her wrists to keep them to the steering wheel. Her hands had been removed. There was nobody in the back seat, and no signs of anyone leaving. I started to panic more, looking in the trees and back towards the house, expecting to see someone watching, but there was nobody else. Nobody except me and the butchered woman. The operator instructed me to go back inside and lock the doors until help arrived. I sprinted back to the front door, the sounds of my own footsteps haunting me as I made my way back to the porch. Once inside, I slammed the door and locked it, flinching at every sound as the voice on the other line tried to keep me quiet. My heart raced so hard in my chest I thought I would have a heart attack. The police arrived. Then another. It didn't feel. It. They didn't find anyone, and the killer didn't leave anything behind. The days that followed blurred together. I had to take some time off work, between the questioning and my driveway turning into a crime scene. I couldn't go anywhere if I tried. I didn't sleep much between the police, a lawyer, and the news crews. I wasn't alone for a while. They searched everything. The basement, the attic, the woods behind my house. They even looked in the crawl space to see if they were holed up in there. There was no evidence left behind, no inclination of where they went either. Killer was never found. I didn't learn much about. Eventually, things went back to normal, and I was allowed to go back to work. It was a relief to get out of the house, Even after they towed that poor woman's car away, I couldn't help but think of it every time I looked outside. Getting into town and back behind my desk was a welcome distraction, and once I was able to busy my mind, it was easier to pretend it was all just a bad dream. That was until I was driving home last night. I was about halfway home when I started noticing an odor, like I'd driven past some roadkill. I tried rolling up the windows and it got worse, a heavy rotting smell that made me gag. I realized it was something inside the car. When I pulled over to find it, I looked under the seats and in the trunk, thinking maybe I had left out some raw meat from the last time I went shopping. I didn't find anything, and I found myself scratching my head at a loss until I looked at the glove box and saw it was leaking. And when I hit the button and opened it, the scent exploded into the cab, along with a cloud of buzzing flies. Stuffed inside the glove box was the pair of woman's hands, decomposed and swelling against the duct tape that wrapped around them. Next story. As of this writing, I have been a crime scene cleaner for 5 years, 11 months, and 22 days. It's not a pretty job, as I'm sure you can guess. The technical term would be biohazard remediation, but I'm not all fancy like that. I clean up nasty shit. I work for an independent cleanup company that is hired by both law enforcement and private parties. I've done it all: homicide cleanup, suicide cleanup, decomposition cleanup after an unattended death, hazardous materials removal, industrial accidents, infectious disease contamination, everything. But I'm not really writing this to talk about the job itself. I'm here to talk about the bizarre, unexplainable, downright weird things that have happened to me in my almost 6 years as a crime scene cleaner. Though 6 years isn't exactly the longest time to have been doing this, I have quite the collection of experiences to recount. My third job was a suicide cleanup. The victim was a 26-year-old woman who had taken her father's shotgun and discharged it with the barrel in her mouth. She did it in the family room of her parents' home while they were away. Before her death, the room was entirely white, save for the TV mounted to the wall. Though the family room was the primary scene, we were told that detectives believed that the victim was practicing self-mutilation through cutting shortly before her death. In the basement bathroom of the house, since I was new, I was tasked with assessing and cleaning the blood in the basement bathroom. I made my way over to the door to the basement and opened it. Looking down, I could see absolutely nothing but pitch black. I flipped the switch to the stairwell light and nothing happened. I had a flashlight in my equipment, so I retrieved it and turned it on. But even with the light, I couldn't see the floor at the bottom of the stairs. I began my descent down the basement steps, and this is where it gets weird. I kept walking and walking and walking down the stairs, but never going anywhere. I would look back up and be farther down than I was previously, but it's like the stairs never stopped. I turned around to go back up, convinced I was just tripping out or something. But as I walked back up the stairs, I never got any closer to the door at the top. It's like I was walking the wrong way on an escalator. I turned around once again and flashed the light down the stairs, once again into perpetual darkness. I nearly jumped out of my skin when I heard a voice behind me ask, "Wand?" I collected myself and turned back around, realizing I was about 4 steps down the stairs, looking up at my supervisor. So I looked back down the stairs and flashed the light down and saw the floor. My supervisor said in a sarcastic tone that this house does indeed have lights, and flicked the light switch at the top of the stairs, illuminating the stairwell. I didn't bother explaining what had happened and went about my job. This one happened about a year into my career with the company I'm at, and was the first job I was ever on that brought up some unexplainable questions. I'd heard a few stories about impossible happenings, but besides the weird staircase incident, which I just chalked up to nerves at the time, I'd never encountered a strange situation like this before. We had gotten to a murder scene where 2 people were victims to shotgun blasts to the head. We began the cleanup, and this required picking up pieces of skull and brain matter. The strange part came when we just kept picking up pieces of skull, finding them all over the place, places they shouldn't have been, like across the room in the opposite direction of the blast. Though not only that, but we found enough pieces of skull to form at least 4 full human skulls. There had never been any reported murders here, and witnesses at the scene said the room was clean before the incident happened. Forensic investigators, or whoever would have the job, tried piecing the skulls together, but to no avail. There just happened to be 2 or more extra skulls blown to pieces at the crime scene. Never did get answers for that. The last one I'll talk about happened recently, actually. Just a few weeks ago. We normally get jobs done within a 3-day time frame, depending on the size and details of the job. Small jobs take a day or less. Big jobs take around 3. This particular job was at a laundromat in the inner city, where a gang slaying had taken place, leaving 5 bodies, both inside and outside the building. We got there and immediately knew it was going to be a 2-day job. Me and one other guy were on it, because our other guys were at some industrial cleanup that required a lot of manpower. The weird thing about this one is that I spent hours cleaning up puddles of blood, and then we left for the night. Upon returning the next day, the puddles of blood were back in their original spots. It was as if neither of us had done any work the previous day. It made no sense, so we cleaned it all again, explaining to the client we ran into a problem and would need a 3rd day to complete the job. So we worked for a while and took an hour for lunch. We got back, and once again the blood had returned. I knew I wasn't crazy. We had buckets of soiled rags and half-used bottles of cleaning materials right in front of us, but we cleaned it all one more time, and this time it stayed clean. I have no explanation for how the blood kept coming back. I have more. Next story. My father was arrested this morning. When news of his arrest arrived, I was the least surprised. My mother outright denied the statement, simply refused even the suggestion that my father could commit such a heinous crime as the one detailed by the reporting officer. My brother, 2 years younger and more inclined to my way of thinking, regarded the news as something to have been expected. My very young, vacant-minded sister failed to grasp the severity of the crimes and simply took the announcement as something generally bad, the circumstances from which my father would assuredly free himself, as his made-up heroes had done during their father-daughter story time. He was being held without bail at the jailhouse about a 20-minute drive from our home. And at the demand of our mother, we all loaded up into the family SUV and drove to meet our interned dad. He sat alone in a spacious cell presumably used to house multiple criminals in one room. Though our town wasn't known for criminality, or anything really, and looked very upset. His dark blue jeans had various cuts in the fabric, as if torn by fingernails, something my mother pretended not to notice. His black sweater had at some point been splattered by something, and since I didn't remember him leaving the home in the morning with any stains, I assumed they were obtained during his alleged criminal act. Skin, which had been almost orange from the unyielding summer sun, was now unbelievably pale, as if he had been dipped in white paint and left to dry somewhere cold and lightless. Black hair, previously combed back, now sat in a downward-felled mess, covering his forehead and his right eye. He didn't seem to mind the obstruction of vision. The officer who had led us to his cell said we had 10 minutes to speak with our father, and that due to the nature of my father's crime, he would have to remain in the corridor to supervise. So we don't have a family lawyer. We've never needed one. And the suggestion of an attorney's presence was either unheard or ignored by my distraught mother. My sister, finally realizing the realness of the situation, ran to my father and hugged him. He didn't seem to notice her embrace nor our gathering in the room. He just stared at the floor, eyes set deep in his face, encircled by darkness born of tiredness or fright, while his mouth hung open and breathless. That's what unnerved me most. In the large, quiet room, where in any other city several prisoners would be held, but in this one only our father resided, you could hear even the smallest sound. I heard my mother's unstable, ragged breathing, my brother's deep, self-calming respiration, and my sister's heavy gulps of air between her sobs. And my own breathing was as steady as I could keep it. But no exhalations could be heard from my father. He just sat there, as motionless as a cadaver, staring into oblivion, or gazing upon some remembered horror. When it became obvious that my father would not respond to our questions, of which there were many, even from myself and my brother, we left him alone and returned to the officer, who escorted us upstairs and into the lobby of the station. In another city, the building would have seemed underfunded. The officers ill-equipped to handle even a slow day's worth of crime. But in our town, the police openly expressed themselves to be bored out of their minds. Some even jokingly wished for an uptick in crime, But I highly doubt the charges laid against my father were what those sentinels of peace had in mind. They laid out the full details, and due to my father's lack of cooperation, hadn't felt the need to spare us the grislier aspects. They were furious with him, absolutely disgusted by what had transpired, and I realized that the suggestion of lawyering up was merely an admonishment of formality. They wanted my father locked up, or perhaps even dead, when all had been said, and my mother had been given time to process what she had been told. We drove home in silence. During the ride, my sister stared out the window and pointed at random objects, mouthing imperceptible things to herself. Her child's mind wouldn't be able to fathom what she had overheard during our briefing at the station. My brother stared down at his hands, which rested palms down on his thighs, his face hard, unmoving. He was old enough to comprehend the things suggested, implied, and fully revealed. I could not see my mother's face. Smile. So my face was blank. I didn't need to come to terms with anything, and I had no difficulty in believing that my father could commit the atrocities of which he has been accused. I was aware of my father's predilection for violence. 6 days ago, a girl had gone missing. Her name was Kelly, and she was 13 years old. We're the same age. The local news reported that she had wandered off from her short walk to school with friends after something in the woods caught her attention. The 2 girls with whom she had been walking did not follow her. He even called out to her to return to the sidewalk, but she ignored them. They ran to school and told the staff, who ran into the woods, and when they could not find her, called the police, who dispatched several officers to assist in the search. After an hour with no success, the town was alerted to the situation and a full search party convened and dispersed throughout the woods and outlying neighborhoods. Today, after yet another unsuccessful morning search, a man walked into the police station holding a large bag. The man knelt in the lobby of the station, cradling the bag, eyes fixated on nothing in particular, but aimed at the general direction of the officers. They approached the man, asked what he held, and when he did not respond, they opened it. Their reactions were what you'd expect them to be. After the immediate shock wore off, they issued somber pats on the back of my father, who still had not spoken. They initially thought that in some gravely fortuitous, lone man search, he had recovered the body of the missing girl. It was only when an officer noticed my father's hands and torn jeans that the atmosphere of the room dramatically shifted. Guns were raised and leveled at my father. Orders were barked aloud and into radios, and the gloom-befallen room was thrown into chaos. So my father had a tale reconstructed to the best accuracy possible, given the evidence, abducted the girl during her sojourn into the woods, bisected her at the hips, hidden the lower half, and returned the upper portion to the station. The lower half, which was found in the rarely used freezer we keep in our basement, had been preserved for a hideous purpose. Apparently, the girl had been slain on the last day of her abduction, and my father had spent the previous few days behaving as if he had not been holding her captive somewhere, where we never found out. Why he kept her for so long before committing his secondary crime, we don't know. Some people believe the whole thing was some prolonged episode of insanity, making the largely uneducated assumption that years of heavy drinking had warped his mind, while others think it was the first of what would have been many murderous indulgences born of some genetic predisposition for savagery. My brother took offense at that, despite not having any knowledge to disprove the assertion. He was only 11, and the seed of evil could very be within him. I think that upset him more than the actual murder. The chance that he could one day carry out a similar act of diabolism. My birthday's in 2 days. Remember how I said I could very well believe my father had done such terrible things? Last year on my birthday, my father was late to my birthday party. He and my mother argued, and in my desire to have a birthday not ruined by fighting, I tried to break up the argument. My obviously drunk father pushed me, and I fell down our stairs, fracturing my spine. I was rendered permanently handicapped. My mother, hoping to preserve the family unit, reported the incident as an accident, that I had fallen while excitedly running up the stairs to retrieve a present. I didn't deny the story, only because I wanted to believe it was just an accident, that he hadn't truly meant to push me with such force. So whether my father's reason He won't speak to any. We plan on moving soon. I don't know if it'll be another small town, but I don't think it'll matter anymore. Even the smallest, most remote place can have crimes as awful as those in any big city. So what keeps me up at night, what sends a chill through my inoperative spine, is the note that was attached to one of the poor girl's legs. It read, "Melissa, I'm sorry for what happened last year. Please forgive me. I got you some new legs, just your size. I know they're not exactly the same. Hers are a bit less toned, but it was the best I could do. I mean, she just stumbled into the woods while I was on my walk. I didn't even call out to her or anything. I hadn't thought of what to get you for your birthday that could make up for what I did last year. And those legs, I just knew they'd be perfect for you. Please, Melissa. Understand? From Dad."